I was thrilled about starting a new chapter in the bustling city. After weeks of searching, I finally found a cozy apartment in an old building right in the heart of downtown. It seemed like the perfect place to begin my new life. From the moment I walked in, everything felt just right. The apartment had so much character, with its vintage charm and prime location. It was everything I had hoped for and more. I felt like I was embarking on a fresh, exciting journey, ready to embrace this new phase of my life with optimism. A few days after moving in, I started noticing unsettling things around the apartment. Doors would inexplicably close on their own, and faint whispers would drift through the rooms in the dead of night. It was as if someone, or something, was watching me, and that creeping sensation made me uneasy. I also began finding objects out of place, even though I was certain I hadn't moved them. I tried to brush these incidents off as coincidences, but the constant feeling of being observed and the unexplained disturbances started to wear on my nerves. I started experiencing vivid, terrifying nightmares that left me feeling exhausted and afraid. Each night, I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, as the dreams seemed to echo the unsettling occurrences in the apartment. The fear began to seep into my waking hours as well. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. This constant sensation of being watched made me increasingly paranoid and insecure within my own home. I felt as if I was living in a constant state of dread, never knowing what might happen next. Driven by fear and desperation, I decided to dig into the history of the building. I visited the local archives and spoke with longtime residents. What I found was chilling. The apartment had been the site of several tragic events, including the mysterious disappearance of the previous tenant. The more I uncovered, the more my worst fears were confirmed. The building was not just old. It was haunted by dark forces that seemed to have no intention of allowing me to stay. Every piece of information I found seemed to align with the strange occurrences I had been experiencing, solidifying my belief that I was not alone in that apartment. Desperate and terrified, I knew I had no choice but to leave immediately. The oppressive atmosphere and relentless paranormal manifestations had become unbearable. As I packed up my things and left the apartment, my heart was heavy with the weight of everything I had experienced. The sense of relief I felt upon finally escaping the building was tainted by the persistent fear of the memories that would haunt me forever. I knew I would never forget the horrors of that place, and as I looked back one last time, the darkness of the apartment seemed to linger in my mind, a grim reminder of the terror I had narrowly escaped. After a grueling day at work, I was beyond relieved to finally get my young daughter to sleep early, a rare and precious moment in our usually chaotic lives. I decided to take full advantage of this unexpected break and headed to bed myself. Exhausted beyond measure, I quickly fell into a deep sleep, savoring the rare tranquility that enveloped the house that night. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by the unsettling sound of slow, methodical footsteps echoing up the stairs. The deliberate pace made it unmistakable. Someone was coming up. Groggy and half asleep, I immediately thought it must be my sister. Even though she didn't live with us, she had a key and often showed up unexpectedly. The footsteps halted right outside my bedroom door, which then creaked open with an eerie slowness. A dense, dark mist began to drift into the room, thickening the already oppressive darkness. As the mist enveloped the space, a voice, unsettlingly familiar yet disconcertingly strange, whispered, "Come here." Thinking it was my sister, I mumbled back, saying we'd talk in the morning, and turned away, hoping to fall back asleep. The next morning, during breakfast, I recounted the bizarre incident to my father. His expression shifted to one of grave concern as he told me that he and my mother had encountered something similar the previous night. He described how the same dense mist had filled their room, the door opening by itself, and the same chilling voice calling out, "Come here." Like me, he had assumed it was either me or my sister and had tried to ignore it, hoping to return to sleep. The realization that we had all experienced this terrifying phenomenon was almost too much to bear. The horrifying truth began to sink in. Something inexplicable and terrifying was happening in our home. The fact that both my father and I had experienced the same eerie phenomena confirmed that we were dealing with an otherworldly presence. The realization that our home was haunted by an entity that had made itself known to us both was nearly paralyzing. The fear of the unknown, coupled with the unsettling feeling of being watched, left us deeply shaken. The night's events had changed everything, and the terror we felt was now a constant, lurking presence in our lives. Moving into the old house in Canada was supposed to be a fresh start. The rent was incredibly low, and it was just a short walk from my university, which made it perfect for my busy schedule. The house had a certain charm to it, though its weathered appearance was more intriguing than off-putting. On my first night, the house was eerily quiet. I was excited and ready to embrace this new chapter of my life, blissfully unaware of the unsettling experiences that awaited me. The silence was almost too perfect, but I chalked it up to the excitement of moving into a new place. Little did I know, this peaceful beginning would soon give way to something far more sinister. It started with faint, unsettling noises that disrupted the peace of my new home. At first, it was just the sound of dragging footsteps echoing through the hallways and soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I could never quite catch the words, but I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the creaks and groans of an old house settling. Still, the sounds didn't stop. They became more frequent and invasive, interrupting my attempts to get comfortable in my new place. Every time I thought I had grown accustomed to them, they would return, a persistent reminder that something was not quite right. Feeling both curious and desperate for answers, I decided to try using a Ouija board to communicate with whatever might be lingering in the house. I set it up in the middle of the living room, the dim light casting eerie shadows around the room. With trembling hands, I asked if there was anyone there, hoping to make contact. The session was uneventful. Nothing moved. No messages were spelled out. I was left feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. For a brief moment after the session, the disturbances seemed to fade, and I almost convinced myself that the worst was over. It was a deceptive calm, and I allowed myself to believe that perhaps the house's secrets had been laid to rest. The disturbances in the house only grew more alarming. Objects would suddenly fall from shelves, crashing to the floor with no apparent cause. I started hearing eerie female laughter echoing through the empty rooms, even though I was alone. Dark stains began to appear on the walls, mingling with the old marks that were already there, as if the house itself was bleeding. My nightmares became relentless and vivid, each one more terrifying than the last. The sensation of being watched never left me, a constant pressure that seemed to creep into every corner of my mind. The house had turned into a prison of fear, and every creak and whisper felt like a taunt from whatever was tormenting me. Unable to bear the escalating terror any longer and fearing for my mental stability, I made the heart-wrenching decision to leave the house. The fear and anxiety had become unbearable, and I could no longer endure the constant, oppressive presence that haunted every moment of my day and night. As I packed my things and left, the weight of my experiences pressed heavily on me. The realization that the presence in the house was far more malevolent than I had ever imagined was chilling. Leaving was a bittersweet relief, finally escaping the nightmarish prison, yet forever haunted by the terror I had endured. The fear lingers, a shadow that follows me even as I try to put the nightmare behind me.